Arthur cherished his quiet routine. Each day unfolded with a familiar rhythm in his small apartment on Elm Street. The morning newspaper rustled softly. Teacups clinked gently against the porcelain saucer. The old grandfather clock ticked like a steady heartbeat in the stillness. Outside, the city buzzed and hummed, but within these walls, peace reigned. This was Arthur's haven, a place where the echoes of his life resonated more clearly than the city's clamour. Elm Street was a symphony of its own, a vibrant tapestry of life in all its messy glory. Cars honked, children shrieked with laughter during impromptu games of tag, and music drifted from open windows, a blend of cultures and generations. But Arthur had developed a sort of immunity to it all. Years of living amidst the controlled chaos had taught him to find solace in the spaces between the noise, to create his own quietude. His sanctuary, however, was not a hermetically sealed vacuum. He knew his neighbours, greeted them with a nod or a polite smile. He had lived in this building for over 4 decades, witnessing families grow, children moving out, and new lives taking their place. The cycle of life, he mused, was much like the city itself, a constant ebb and flow of energy. He had found a strange comfort in that thought, a sense of belonging in the grand scheme of things. Then the young family moved in upstairs. Arthur knew the moment they arrived. The sounds were unmistakable. The heavy thud of furniture being moved, the excited chatter of young voices, a playful bark that echoed down the stairwell. His quiet sanctuary was suddenly filled with the unfamiliar symphony of new life, and a flicker of unease ran through him. The sounds were not inherently unpleasant. In fact, they possessed a certain joyful energy that was hard to dislike completely. There was a rhythmic patter of tiny feet chasing after a brightly coloured ball. A woman's voice, melodic and filled with laughter, would often float through the ceiling, accompanied by the deep rumble of a man's reply. And then there was the child, a little boy, it seemed, whose infectious giggle could pierce even the thickest of walls. Arthur found himself strangely drawn to these sounds. They were a stark contrast to the rhythmic ticking of his clock and the rustle of his newspaper. They spoke of a life brimming with energy, a life he had once known. He would often find himself pausing, unconsciously holding his breath as if afraid to break the spell, a wistful smile gracing his lips. The nostalgia, however, was always tinged with a growing unease. The pitter-patter of little feet became a relentless stampede in the quiet hours. The playful bark transformed into a jarring woof that startled him awake at night. The joyful symphony, once a pleasant interlude, began to feel like an intrusion, a cacophony that shattered the peace he had so carefully cultivated over the years. Sleep, once a comforting escape, became elusive. He would lie awake, counting cracks in the ceiling, every fibre of his being attuned to the sounds filtering down from the apartment above. The laughter that had initially charmed him now grated on his nerves, each peal a jarring note in the symphony of his life. His days were spent in a state of perpetual anticipation, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach with every creak of the floorboards above. The newspaper lay abandoned on his lap, the words blurring into meaningless lines. The tea grew cold in his cup. The quiet sanctuary that had once been his solace had become a battleground for his peace of mind. Old man Hemmings, who lived across the hall and 2 doors down, had always been the resident problem solver, a man whose wisdom seemed to be as vast as his age. Arthur, after days of internal struggle, decided to confide in him. "The noise, Hemmings," he began, his voice a low murmur. "It's incessant. I haven't had a good night's sleep since they moved in." Hemmings listened patiently. His eyes crinkled at the corners with understanding. He had, after all, witnessed the ebb and flow of life on Elm Street for longer than Arthur himself. He remembered a time when Arthur was a young newlywed, his apartment filled with the sounds of his own growing family. "Children will be children, Arthur," Hemmings said finally, a hint of amusement in his voice. "They have a way of turning a house into a home." But Arthur wasn't to be consoled. "It's not just the child, Hemmings," he insisted, his voice rising in frustration. It's everything. The running, the shouting, the... He paused, searching for the right word, the constant commotion. Hemmings leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well then," he said slowly, "perhaps it's time to remind them of the building's rules." Section 5. Whispers turn to actions. The building's rules. Arthur clung to those words like a lifeline. Armed with a renewed sense of purpose, he began documenting every infraction. Each stomp, every bark, every burst of laughter was meticulously recorded in a small notebook, a testament to his disruptive peace. He began leaving anonymous notes, terse and unsigned, slipped under their door at odd hours. "Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Please refrain from excessive noise." The subtle hints, however, seemed to have little effect. The family continued their merry ways, oblivious to the growing resentment brewing beneath them. Arthur's frustration grew with each passing day, his resentment festering like a wound denied air. He escalated his efforts. He began deliberately stomping his feet when he knew the child was trying to nap. He would bang on the ceiling with a broom handle at the slightest sound after 10 p.m. He even took to playing loud opera music at the crack of dawn, a jarring counterpoint to the sounds of their morning routine. Section 6. A child's laughter silenced. The young family, initially oblivious, began to take notice. The laughter that once rang through the apartment became subdued, replaced by hushed whispers. The child, once a whirlwind of energy, was now often confined indoors, his playful energy stifled. The sounds of their lives, once so vibrant and full, were slowly being muted, replaced by an unsettling silence. One evening, Arthur heard a soft knock on his door. He opened it to find the young mother standing there, her face etched with concern. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is there something we're doing that's bothering you?" Arthur, taken aback by the direct confrontation, found himself speechless. He averted his eyes, suddenly ashamed of the anger that had consumed him. He mumbled something about the building rules, his words hollow even to his own ears. The young mother's shoulders slumped. "We're trying," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We just want our son to have a happy childhood." She turned and walked away, leaving Arthur standing there, the weight of his actions settling heavily upon him. Section 7. Echoes of shared experiences. Word of Arthur's complaint spread through the building like wildfire. What had begun as a private vendetta had become a topic of hushed conversations in the hallways, a cautionary tale whispered over cups of coffee. And as the whispers spread, so too did the stories. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 2B, who had always been fond of Arthur, confided that her grandson had been just as energetic when he was a boy. "They grow up so fast," she said, her eyes filled with a wistful sadness. "Before you know it, the silence is all you have." Mr. Chen, the elderly gentleman who lived on the first floor, shared a story about his own struggles with loneliness after his wife had passed away. "Noise," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "can be a sign of life, a reminder that we are not alone." Each story, each shared experience, chipped away at the wall of resentment Arthur had built around himself. He began to see the young family not as intruders in his sanctuary, but as fellow travelers navigating the complexities of life, their joys and sorrows echoing his own. Section 8. The Weight of Silence. The silence that followed was deafening. The once familiar sounds of the young family, the laughter, the running, the playful barks were gone. The apartment above, once a source of both annoyance and strange comfort, was eerily quiet. Arthur found himself straining to hear any sign of life, any indication that the family he had driven away was still there. The silence he had craved was now a crushing weight. His apartment, once a haven of peace, felt more like a prison, the walls closing in on him. He tried to lose himself in his routine, in the familiar rhythms of his day, but the silence followed him everywhere. It was in the quiet moments, when the city outside seemed to hold its breath, that the guilt settled in. He had sought peace, and in doing so, he had destroyed the very thing that gave life its melody, the messy, chaotic, beautiful symphony of human connection. Section 9. an emptiness more profound. A moving truck arrived a few weeks later, its presence a stark reminder of Arthur's actions. He watched from his window as the young family packed their belongings, their faces etched with a sadness that mirrored his own. The little boy, clutching a worn teddy bear, cast a last lingering look at the building before disappearing into the back of the truck. A new family moved in shortly after, a family with even louder, more boisterous children. The sounds were almost unbearable at first, a constant assault on Arthur's senses. But this time, something had shifted within him. He no longer reached for his notebook to document every infraction. He didn't bang on the ceiling or blast opera music in retaliation. Instead, he found himself smiling at the sound of their laughter, a bittersweet ache in his heart. He had learned, in the most painful way, that silence could be emptier, more deafening than any noise. Section 10. Life's Unpredictable Melodies. Life on Elm Street continued its relentless rhythm. The seasons changed, painting the trees outside Arthur's window in a kaleidoscope of colours. The city, oblivious to his internal struggles, continued its symphony of noise. And Arthur, sitting in his quiet apartment, found a new kind of peace, a peace born not of silence but of understanding. He realized that life was not a solo act, a carefully orchestrated melody played out in isolation. It was a cacophony of instruments, each playing its part, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes clashing, but always contributing to the richness of the whole. He had spent so long trying to silence the world around him that he had forgotten the simple truth. Peace was not the absence of noise, but the ability to find harmony within it.